Well, hello and welcome to another video by Financial Learning. On today's video, I want to talk about a very strategic move that CleanSpark just announced. We've heard it first in the earnings call from Gary Vecchiarelli. We're going to listen to that together. And then after that, I'm going to break it down using some of the 10Q information that we were provided later that day. And then I also decided to do an exercise on an estimated exahash rate that this specific deal will get us. So without further ado, let's get right into it.
On the topic of tariffs, I'd like to discuss a unique transaction we recently completed. In April, we exercised a portion of our option with our vendor for 13,200 of the latest generation miners. The total amount due under this exercise was approximately $76.6 million. However, we negotiated a favorable payment arrangement using Bitcoin, whereby the vendor accepted Bitcoin as consideration with an exchange rate at 150% of Bitcoin's spot price on the date of payment. This means we transferred 691 Bitcoin with a fair value of approximately $66.7 million, or a spot rate of $96,600 per Bitcoin. This resulted in savings of approximately $10 million as the vendor applied a Bitcoin price of $110,941, or 15% higher than spot, towards the purchase. Additionally, as part of the transaction, we received a free call option to repurchase 691 Bitcoin at the $110,000 price on a date later this fall. We expect to exercise this option if the fair value of Bitcoin is greater than this amount. If the fair value is less, we essentially have locked in our miners at a lower price and more than offset any potential tariff impacts.
All right, so you just heard from Gary in terms of this transaction, and it is also listed on the latest 10Q. I'll put a link in the description, but I did want to go over some of that with you. And then I also grabbed some of the older 10Q information when it comes to some of the purchase commitments. We also saw what CleanSpark had already negotiated specific pricing for these immersion miners at. And then now with this latest Bitcoin purchase, I want to see exactly how much of a discount they're getting on top of their already negotiated terms. And then I do have an image of this immersion miner down at the bottom left, and that is what you would pay if you were a retailer just wanting to purchase this on your own. So jumping straight in, let's look at number 18, commitments and contingencies. And again, I have the link for these different SEC filings, and I'll put those in the description. But what I want to pay attention to is there was 26,000 of these S21 XP immersion miners, and CleanSpark had negotiated a total purchase price of $167,700,000. So on the left-handed side, you can see at the table there, that purchase price ends up getting them each of these immersion miners for $6,450 a piece. And then using some of the specification information on Bitmain's website, you can find out that this would be for a total of 7.8 exahash per second. Now, this was the total purchase order, but there was some additional amount of this purchase order still available, still part of this commitment and contingency section. So when I looked at the latest 10Q, this would be for the quarter ending March 31st of 2025, you would see that there was still another $74,496,000 worth of this purchase commitment. So using the same price structure above, you can see what actually was remaining in terms of that exahash. So at 11,550 miners left over, and that's based off of the total value remaining from the purchase order and what they were paying per miner. That is the total amount of those miners. So looking at that, it's still 3.46 exahash per second. That is a pretty significant, a little less than 10% of their hash rate is available for purchase on this price guarantee contract. But moving down into this latest miner option exercise, it does say here that they have an option to purchase 13,200 miners. So a little bit more than what was remaining on the original commitment. But this amount was committed at $76,600,000. And here's where it gets interesting. As Gary did mention, they are able to get a 15% conversion premium. I think he said 115%, but I'm just looking at it from a 15% discount amount. They're able to actually purchase all of those same Bitcoin miners, the 13,200, for just $66,751,000. So that's a pretty hefty price tag discount. And Gary did mention it was about $10 million. So the math does add up here. So you can see here at 691 Bitcoin and at that specific purchase price that they were able to negotiate, it has that spot Bitcoin pricing at $96,601 per Bitcoin. So that's pretty exciting. And the other portion of this announcement was the optionality to repurchase that amount of Bitcoin at a future date in the fall at a spot price of $110,900. So in the event that Bitcoin just rips and it's around 120, 125,000 or more, they're able to repurchase that same 691 Bitcoin at this $110,900 spot price. So again, that's a pretty cool feature that they do have at their disposal. And one other thing just to mention, they did not touch their treasury in terms of that 12,101 Bitcoin. Instead, they had already transferred some of the Bitcoin over into their Coinbase line of credit backing, and they were able to get out about $100 million or so for that. Gary did mention that on the call as well, and you can actually see a little bit of that information on that last April mining update. And I will be putting out a video later on the April mining update using some of the latest numbers for that SG&A and some of the energy costs that we did get from CleanSpark on this earnings. But moving back into this. So if the purchase order was to get fully exercised and they get these installed, the total hash rate is actually 3.96 exahash per second. And they did mention that this specific order is for the latest gen miner. So I am making the assumption that is for these immersion miners. So pretty exciting stuff. If they're able to get all this going, they got a major discount, almost $2,300 off. So I think this is a great deal by CleanSpark, and this is just another thing that the company is able to do because they have such a nice Bitcoin treasury amount. They have that leverage to be able to strike these different deals. And with the Bitcoin pricing the way it is, and as we keep seeing that price action kind of going upwards, we're seeing it already above $100,000. It just gives CleanSpark just that much more leverage in terms of negotiating on different price contracts. All right, and that about wraps up for me, folks. Hope you enjoyed this quick update. Just reviewing that really exciting news that CleanSpark did share with investors on the earnings call. Hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, consider giving it a like, subscribe to my channel if you haven't already, and drop a comment. What do you think about CleanSpark's decision to go ahead and transact this specific purchase agreement? I think it's a very bullish thing considering what the price of the immersion miners are. I do see it as an example of a way to reduce some of that depreciation amount as well because they are getting these miners at a discount. So just another really exciting thing that CleanSpark is doing while they're leveraging their Bitcoin hodl. So love to hear your thoughts on that. And with all that said, hope you all have a great rest of the day. Keep calm, hash on, and I'll see you on the next one.